Okay, now we are going to read a text. We are not afraid to die. If we can all be together. It is written by Gordon Cook and Alan East. Written by Gordon Cook and Alan East. Okay, you must remember this. We are not afraid to die. Let's talk about past introduction. Let's talk about the introduction. Okay, William was written by Gordon Cook and Alan East. The story is about a 37-year-old businessman. Okay, the story is about a 37-year-old businessman. 37 years old businessman. So this is our first point. Businessman. Who is the narrator of the story? Who is the narrator of the story? He has a wife. So who is the narrator of the story? 30 years old businessman. And again the question is, who is the protagonist of the story? Again this will be the answer, 37 years old businessman. And again that if the question is asked that the story we are referring to is about which person? About 37-year-old businessman. Okay, so what does he has? 37 years old businessman. He has a wife named Mary and two children, Jonathan aged 6 and Susan aged 7. So we got that it is a 37 years old businessman. She has a wife. Okay. She has a wife and two children. They have two children. Okay, one is 6 years old, another is 7 years old. Okay, so this is a family. So it is about a family. So here we refers to this family. Okay. Written by Gordon Cook and Alan East. The story is about a 37 years old businessman who is the narrator of the story. He has a wife named Mary and the two children, Jonathan and aged Susan. So we did not get the name of that businessman. So we first learn the name of these two children. Okay, one that 6 years old, that child is named Jonathan. And this child is named Susan. Aged 7. He and his wife both dream of a voyage. He and his wife both dream of a voyage around the world on their ship Wave Walker. So this family had a ship. Okay, this family had a ship. And this ship is called Wave Walker. Wave Walker, like something is walking in that wave. So I have to write it clearly. Wave Walker. Wave Walker, which is 23 meter long. It is 23 meter long. Which is 23 meter long. 30-ton wooden hull, just like that of the famous Captain James Cook. The whole family started sailing from Plymouth. So they started journey from Plymouth. Okay. Plymouth. So they started a journey from Plymouth, England on July 1976. 1976, July. It is the date. You must remember this date. The initial phase of the 3-year-long journey was from Africa to Cape Town. The initial phase of 3-year-long journey was from Africa to Cape Town. It was pleasant while heading east. Along with 2 newly hired crewmen, strong waves hit them and their survival became a question. The story tells us about how they fought each day and survived till the end. Take free. Okay. Now let's look at the summary. The narrator and his wife plan a voyage around the world just like famous Captain James Cook. They have been preparing and perfecting their seafaring skills for the past 16 years. They get a ship which is 23 meters long and weighs 30 tons, wooden hulled, named Wave Walker. They test it in the rough weather for months. In July 1976, they all start their journey from Plymouth, England. They sail from Africa to Cape Town, which was quite a pleasant journey. Before heading east, the narrator hired 2 crewmen, Larry Weasel and Herb Sigler, to help them tackle one of the toughest seas, the Southern Indian Ocean. They encountered strong and alarming waves during the second day. By December 25, they all managed to reach 35,000 kilometers east of Cape Town. The family somehow manages to surpass the bad weather and celebrates Christmas together. The weather changes for the worse, and on January 2nd, the big waves hit them. They try to slow the ship down by dropping storm jib and hit a heavy mooring rope in a loop across a stern, but it doesn't help much. They carry their life raft, drill, attach lifelines, don life jackets and oil skins. Later in the evening, a vertical hand and huge wave strikes the ship and the narrator is thrown off from the ship. He accepts his approaching death and starts losing consciousness. When the ship is about to overturn, a huge wave hits again and turns it right back. He suffers injuries in ribs and mouth. He grabs the guardrail and sails into the ship's main boom. He instructs his wife Mary. So the name of his wife is Mary. Okay. He instructs his wife Mary to guard the wheel as he realizes that the ship has water in the lower parts. His crewman starts pumping out the water. The narrator goes to his children's cabin and checks on them. His daughter Sue informs him about a bump on her head. So Susan, her nickname is Sue, informs him about a bump on her head, which he ignores because his major concern is to save the ship. The narrator does waterproofing on the gaping holes. This makes water to deviate on the right side. The hand pump gets blocked due to debris and electric pump. Due to debris and electric pump gets short circuited. However, he later finds a spare electric pump and connects it to drain the water. They all keep pumping the water all night long. Their midday calls are not answered as they are in the remotest corner of the world. Sue, on the other hand, has now a swollen black eye and a deep cut in her arm. On being asked her father about her injuries, she tells him she didn't want him to worry as he was trying to save them. After 15 hours, the situation gets under control. The narrator decides to work in rotation and rest. The water levels are controlled, but the leaks are still there below the water line. The ship is in bad shape now. It is not in a condition to reach Australia, and so they decide to reach the nearest island, Isle Amsterdam, a French scientific base. As their supporting engines were also damaged, the chances of the ship to reach the destination are low. After pumping the water out continuously for 36 hours, they took a sigh of relief. Only a few centimeters of water was left to be pumped out of the boat. They hoisted the storm ship as the mainmast was destroyed. They ate their first meal in 2 days. Some corned beef and crackers. The weather soon started changing, and again the black clouds took over by the morning. Took over by the morning of January 5. His son Jonathan told him that he didn't fear death as long as they were all together. This filled him with determination to fight the sea. The struggle continued, and the narrator tried his best to protect the weakened starboard side. The same evening, the narrator and his wife sat together, holding hands, thinking that their end was near. His children continuously supported him, which gave him moral support to keep going. The wave walker sailed through the storm and made it. The narrator then calculated their exact position by working on the wind speed. While he was brainstorming, Sue gave him a card that he had. The wave walker sailed through the storm and made it. The narrator then calculated their exact position by working on the wind speed. While he was brainstorming, Sue gave him a card that she had made expressing her love and gratitude towards the family. He instructed Larry to steer the course to 185 degrees. He said that if they were lucky, they could hope to find an island by 5 p.m. He dozed off and suddenly got up around 6 p.m. He believed that they didn't make it and was disappointed. His son came and informed him about how they reached the isle Amsterdam Island, and he called him best daddy and best captain. They reached the island with little struggle, and with the help of inhabitants, the whole team, the family, 2 crew members never stopped trying. Their struggle and hard work finally saved them. We are not afraid to die if we can all be together. In July 1976, my wife I'm going to read this. In July 1976, my wife Mary, son Jonathan, 6, daughter Suzanne, 7, and I set sail from Plymouth, England, to duplicate the round the world voyage made 200 years earlier by Captain James Cook. For the longest time, Mary and I, a 37-year-old businessman, had dreamed of sailing in the wake of the famous explorer, and for the past 16 years, we had spent all our leisure time honing our seafaring skills in British waters. Our boat, Wave Walker, a 23-meter, 30-ton wooden hull beauty, had been professionally built, and we had spent months fitting it out and testing it in the toughest weather we could find. So here, the narrator, 37 years old businessman, along with his wife Mary and 2 children, Jonathan, age 6, and Suzanne, age 7, went on a voyage on their ship in July 1976. They started from Plymouth, England. They wanted to complete the sea trip around the world, just like the one that had been completed 200 years ago by the famous Captain James Cook. The narrator and his wife spent 16 years improving their seafaring skills. They got a ship built professionally, a 23-meter long, 30-ton heavy wooden hull called Wave Walker. They took several months to test in the roughest of weathers. Passage. Okay. In July 76, my wife Mary, son Jonathan, and 6 daughters Susan and I set sail from Plymouth, England. So the narrator is talking about that they started their journey on July 1976, and this journey they were to duplicate the round voyage made 200 years earlier by Captain James Cook. Such like Captain James Cook who made a voyage 200 years ago. So like him, his family is also going to make a round world voyage. Okay. For the longest time, Mary and I, Mary is my wife, and I, a 37 years old businessman, had dreamed of sailing in the wake of famous explorer. And for the past 16 years, we had spent all our leisure time honing the seafaring skills in British waters. So they all practiced for such their toughest journey. Our boat, Wave Walker, so the name of their boat is Wave Walker, a 3 meter long and 30-ton wooden hull, Beauty. So their boat was 23 meter long, and it was constructed by 30-ton. It was constructed with 30-ton wooden hull, and this ship is called a Beauty. It is a beauty for them. It had been professionally built, and we had spent months fitting it out. So the narrator and his wife, and some with the help of some others, like probably they had made it and testing it in the toughest weather we could find, and they checked it. They tried to find out if there is any fault. So they tested it in the roughest weather they could find. Okay. The first leg, rain must. The first leg of our planned 3 year, 105,000 kilometer journey passed pleasantly as we sailed down the west coast of Africa to Cape Town. There, before heading east, we took on 2 crewmen, American Larry Weisel and Swiss Herb Seigler, to help us tackle one of the world's roughest seas, the Southern Indian Ocean. On our second out of Cape Town, we began to encounter strong gales. For the next few weeks, they blew continuously. Gales did not worry me, but the size of the waves was alarming, up to 15 meters as high as our mainmast. The initial phase of the 3-year-long journey of 105,000 kilometers passed pleasantly. They sailed down the west coast of Africa to Cape Town. The narrator hired 2 crewmen before heading towards the east to tackle the roughest sea, the Southern Indian Sea. Their names were Larry Weisel, an American, and Herb Seigler, a Swiss. On the second day in Cape Town, they encountered a strong wind which continued for several weeks. A strong wind was not a problem, but 15 meters high waves, which were the height of the mast, worried the narrator. Okay. The first leg of our plan. First leg of our plans means their initial stage. Okay, their initial phase. The first leg of our plan, 3 year. They planned for 3 years, and it was total 105,000 kilometers. So out of this 105,000 kilometer, it was the first leg. So, okay, also a little journey. Their initial journey passed pleasantly, very pleasantly. That means easily, okay, finely, nicely. as we sailed down the west coast of Africa to Cape Town. As we sailed down the west coast of Africa to Cape Town. So their first initial journey was from Africa's west coast to Cape Town. There, before heading east, that means before going to the east, we took two crewmen. They took two crewmen. One was American, his name was Larry Weasel, and another was Swiss, there his name was Hart Ziegler, to help us tackle one of the world's toughest seas, the Southern Indian Ocean. Southern Indian Ocean, that was very much dangerous. It was roughest weather. Okay, so they hired these two crewmen, to tackle the world's roughest sea. On our second day, out of Cape Town, we began to encounter strong gales. For the next few weeks, they blew continuously. On our second day out of Cape Town, when they left Cape Town, and in the second day, on the second day, they faced a problem. It was very huge, bad weather. It was a very bad weather. For the next few weeks, they blew continuously. It was strong gales, okay, and that blew continuously. Gales did not worry me. Gales did not worry me, but size of the waves was alarming. But the size of the waves, that was very dangerous. Okay, up to 15 meters long. It was as high as our mast. December 25 found us 3,500 kilometers east of Cape Town. Despite atrocious weather, we had a wonderful holiday complete with a Christmas tree. New Year's Day saw no improvement in the weather, but we reasoned that it had to change soon, and it did change for the worse. At dawn on January 2, the waves were gigantic. We were sailing with only a small storm jib and were still making 8 knots. As the ship rose to the top of each wave, we could see endless enormous seas rolling towards us, and the screaming of the wind and spray was painful to the ears. To slow the boat down, we dropped the storm jib and lashed a heavy mooring rope in a loop across the stern. Then we double lashed everything, ran through our life raft, reeled at us lifeliness, donned oil skins and life jackets, and waited. On December 25th, they had traveled 3,500 kilometers east of Cape Town. They celebrated Christmas together. Despite the bad weather, they Despite the bad weather, the weather remained the same till New Year's Day, but they hoped for it to change soon. The weather conditions worsened on the early morning of 2nd January too. The waves were very huge. They were sailing with a small storm jib at a speed of 8 knots. When the ship was sailing with the huge waves, they could see the huge sea in front of them. The noise of the waves and strong winds was painful for the ears. They dropped the storm jib to slow down the ship and hit a heavy mooring rope across the back part of the ship in a loop. They lashed everything with double force. The noise of the waves and the strong winds was painful for the ears. They dropped the storm jib to slow down the ship and hit a heavy mooring rope across the back part of the ship in a loop. They slashed everything with double force. They put on their oilskins and life jackets, attached lifelines, and went through the life raft trails and waited. December 25 pounds as 3,500 kilometers east of Cape Town. So they left Cape Town and they left Cape Town and they are going ahead. And on December 25 they crossed 3,500 kilometers distance despite atrocious weather. So that meant it was very bad weather. We had wonderful holiday complete with a Christmas tree. So it was a bad weather, but still they celebrated Christmas. Okay. New Year's Day saw no improvement, and it was New Year's Eve. New Year's Day saw no improvement, but they reasoned that it had to change soon. But they hope that weather will be changed. Probably it will be good, and that it did change. So that change had come, but that it was not a good change, it was worse. The weather worsened. At dawn on January 2, it was the day of January 2nd of January. 2nd day of January. The waves were gigantic. Waves were very huge. It was very long, very strong, very powerful. We were sailing with only a small storm jib, and our narrator was sailing with only a small storm jib. Okay, and were still making 8 knots, and the speed of the boat was 8 knots. As the ship rose to the top of each wave, and that waves were gigantic, means very high, very huge, very high. Okay, so that's why the ship rose to the top of each wave. We could see endless, enormous seas rolling towards us. So that situation, that scenery was very gigantic, very fearful, very tremendous for them. And the screaming of the wind and spray was painful. Okay, spring of the wind and spray means that tight. Okay. liquid that is blown or driven through the air in the form of a tiny drops. Okay, that means spray. Spray means that it was a huge the waves were very huge, so that's why that spray means it was that water was sprinkling, so it says some kind of that meaning. The screaming of the wind and spray was painful to the ears, so that noise was very painful for the ears. To slow the boat down, we dropped the storm jeep. They needed to slow the boat, so what did they do? They dropped the storm jeep and lashed a heavy mooring rope in a loop across the stern. So all this they did. Then we double lashed everything, went through our life raft drill, attached life lines, droned oilskin, life jackets, and waited. So they all attached, all or life jackets. Okay. The first indication of impending disaster came at about 6 p.m. with an ominous silence. The wind dropped and the sky immediately grew dark. Then came a growing roar and an enormous cloud towered aft for the ship. With horror, I realized that it was not a cloud but a wave like no other. It was not a cloud but a wave like no other I had ever seen. It appeared perfectly vertical and almost twice the height of other waves, with a frightful breaking crest. Around 6 p.m., an unpleasant silence rolled over. It was an indication of a disaster which was about to happen. The wind suddenly dropped and the sky was darker with heavy clouds. A huge cloud was coming towards the stern of the ship, but later the narrator realized that it was a huge wave. The wave was perfectly vertical and it was twice the height of previous waves. They saw with the top of the wave looking unpleasant due to its heights. Okay. The first indication of impending disaster came at about 6 p.m. So at 6 p.m., that indication, that assumption, that presumptions came with an ominous silence. It was silent. Look, everything was like all right, but it was an indication. It was an indication. Indication of what? Indication of impending disaster. Came out at about 6 p.m. The wind dropped, and the sky immediately grew dark. The wind dropped, and the sky immediately grew dark. So there was no wind. Wind had stopped, but it was dark. Why it was dark? Then came a growing roar, something thundering sound, and an enormous cloud towered aft of the ship. And our narrator noticed that an enormous cloud has risen. With horror, I realized that it was not a cloud but a wave like no other I had ever seen. But it was not a cloud, it was a huge wave. It appeared perfectly vertical. So it was vertical, that means it was very high. It was a huge wave, almost twice the height of other waves. They have seen at least till now. Our author has described very long, huge waves, but it was twice of the height, with a frightful breaking crest. So our narrator was very frightful at this sight. The roar increased to a thunder as the stern moved up the face of the wave. And for a moment I thought we might ride over it. But then a tremendous explosion shook the deck. A torrent of green and white water broke over the ship. My head smashed into the wheel, and I was aware of flying overboard and sinking below the waves. Below the waves, I accepted my approaching death, and as I was losing consciousness, I felt quite peaceful. The thunder increased and the wave moved the stern up. They thought that it would not do anything damage, but huge explosion vibrated the deck. A strong, moving stream of green and white water broke over the ship. The narrator's head smashed in the wheel of the ship. He flew overboard and sank. Below the waves, he accepted that his death was approaching and started losing consciousness. He felt quite peaceful. The roar increased to a thunder as the stern moved up the face of the wave, and for a moment I thought we might ride over it. But then a tremendous explosion shook the deck. So it was a very dreadful situation, very fearful situation. A torrent of green and white water broke over the ship. Torrent of green and white water broke over the ship. My head smashed into the wheel, so the narrator's head was struck, and I was aware of flying overboard and sinking below the waves. So the narrator was aware of flying overboard and he was sinking below the waves. I accepted my approaching death. Our narrator accepted his approaching that he is going to die. And as I was losing consciousness, I felt quite peaceful. As he was losing consciousness, he felt quite peaceful. Unexpectedly, my head popped out of the water. A few meters away, Wavewalker was near capsizing, her masts almost horizontal. Then a wave hurled her upright. My lifeline jerked taut. I grabbed the guard rails and sailed through the air into Wavewalker's main boom. Subsequent waves tossed me around the deck. Subsequent waves tossed me around the deck like a rag doll. My left ribs cracked, my mouth filled with blood and broken teeth. Somehow I found the wheel, lined up the stern for the next wave, and hung on. Water, water everywhere. I could feel that the ship had water below, but I dared not abandon the wheel to investigate. Suddenly, the front hatch was thrown open and Mary appeared. We were sinking, she screamed, that the decks were smashed. We were full of water. Take the wheel, I shouted as I scrambled for the hatch. The narrator's head popped out of water. The narrator's head popped out of water. The ship was about to overturn, but a wave turned her upright. His lifeline jacket was stretched. He grabbed the guardrails and sailed to the ship's main pole. The waves tossed him around the deck. He was injured as his left ribs cracked, his mouth filled with blood, and he had a broken tooth. He found the wheel, lined the stern for the next wave, and waited. There was water everywhere. The narrator could feel water below the ship, but he didn't lift the wheel alone. Suddenly, the front door opened and his wife, Mary, came screaming that they were sinking. She said, "The decks are smashed. We are full of water." The narrator handed her the wheel and climbed towards the door. Laddie and Herb were pumping like madmen. Somehow I managed to stretch canvas and secure waterproof hatch covers across the gaping holes. Some water continued to stream below, but most of it was now being deflected over the side. More problems arose when our hand pumps started to block up with the debris floating around the cabins, and the electric pump short-circuited. The water level rose threateningly. Back on deck, I found that our two spare hand pumps had been wrenched overboard, along with the foresail, jib, and the dinghy and main anchor. Then I remembered we had another electric pump under the cart room floor. I connected it to an output pipe and was thankful to find that it worked. The narrator stretched the canvas cloth and secured the waterproof hatch which covered the gaping holes. Some water streamed below and some was now deflected over the side. The hand pump was blocked as rubbish was floating around the cabins and entered it. The electric pump short-circuited as the water level rose. The narrator found two hand pumps had been removed along with a pipe. pipe, jeep, a small boat, and the remain anchor. He found another electric pump under the chart room. He connected it to an out pipe, and it started working. So what happened here? Oh God, switching Squiddo is distracting me. Somehow I managed to stretch canvas. So the narrator managed to stretch his canvas and secure waterproof hatch covers across the gaping holes, and he is securing waterproof and he is trying to cover the gaping holes. Some water continued to stream below, but most of it was not being deflected over the side. More problems arose when our hand pumps started to block up with the debris. So they had hand pumps and that was not working around cabins, and the electric pump shortcuts, and that they had also an electric pump that was not also working because it was short circuited. The water levels rose threateningly, and the water level is rising threateningly, rising after rising, but the water cannot be removed. Back on deck, I found that our two spare hand pump has been ranged overhead along with the foresail. So there are two hand pumps that was also gone. Then I remember we had another electric pump, and he recalled that they had another electric pump under the chart room floor. I connected it to an out pipe and was thankful to find that it worked, and they were very lucky that that another electric pump was working properly. Next, the night dragged on with an endless, bitterly cold routine of pumping, steering and working the radio. We were getting no replies to our Maytag calls, which was not surprising in this remote corner of the world. Shu's head had swollen alarmingly. She had two enormous black eyes, and now she showed us a deep cut on her arm. When I asked why she hadn't made more of her injuries before this, she replied, "I didn't want to worry you when you were trying to save us all." So what is happening here? The whole night was about the endless routine of pumping out the water, steering the wheel and working the radio. There were no replies to their signals sent over the radio, as they were in the remotest part of the world. Shu's head was now more swollen, and she had two back eyes. Shu's head was now more swollen, and she had two back eyes with a deep cut in her arm. With a deep cut, two back eyes with a deep cut in her arms. When one being asked why she didn't tell him about her injuries earlier, she said that she didn't want to worry him as she was trying to save all of them. So here, just look at this lines, save us all. Then night dragged on with an endless, bitterly cold routine of pumping, steering, working the radio. So that night was endless because they were all struggling all over the night. So they were pumping, they were studying and working on radio. Working on radio, what does it mean? Working on radio means that working on radio because they were sending signals through radio, but that signal, we were getting no signal replies to our Maytag calls, which was not surprising in this remote corner of this world. But they were not getting any replies. Why? Because they were remotest corner of the world. So somehow that signal was not reaching properly where it should reach. Shu's head had swollen alarmingly. Shu's head had swollen alarmingly. Shu's head had swollen alarmingly. She had two enormous black eyes. And now she showed us a deep cut on her arm. So Shu's head had swollen alarmingly. That means she was very much covered with the water. and she had two black eyes, means she had two wounded. She was wounded. Her hand was wounded. How she showed us a deep cut on her arm. She showed the narrator that she had a deep cut on her arm. When I asked why hadn't made more of her injuries before this, she replied, and when the narrator asked that why hadn't made more injuries before this, she replied, I didn't want to worry you when you were trying to save us all. So what does it mean? It means that she is a small child, she is a little child, but she shows a maturity. She did not tell her father that she was wounded because she did not want to worry her father, because her father was busy and who was trying to save them all. So that's why she did not tell about her injuries to her father. By morning on January 3, the pumps had the water level sufficiently under control for us to take 2 hours rest in rotation, but we still had a tremendous leak somewhere below the water line, and on checking I found that nearly all the boats main rib frames were smashed down to the keel. In fact, there was nothing holding up a whole section of the starboard hull except a few covered partitions. We had survived for 15 hours since the wave hit, but wave walkers wouldn't hold together long enough for us to reach Australia. I checked our charts and calculated that there were 2 small islands a few hundred kilometers to the east. One of them, Isle Amsterdam, was a French scientific base. Our only hope was to reach these pinpricks in the vast ocean, but unless the wind and seas bettered so we could hoist sail, our chances would be slim indeed. The great wave had put our auxiliary engine out of action. So what does this lines mean? The water level was under control by morning of January 3rd. So all of them took 2 hours rest in rotation, but there still was a leak somewhere below the water line. Upon checking, the boat rib structure was badly broken down till the base of the ship. The whole section of starboard was held together with a few covered partitions. The ship's condition was so bad that it would not make it till Australia. The narrator checked the charts and calculated that there were 2 small islands a few kilometers to the east. One of them was Isle Amsterdam, which was a French scientific base. Their only hope was to search and reach that island, but only if the wind and the sea do not cause further damage, else their chances were slim. The wave had destroyed the ship's auxiliary engine. So what is happening here? By morning on January 3rd, the pumps had water level sufficiently under control, so that electric pump was working. But here they call it the pumps. Okay, so maybe that their handy pumps was good. Meanwhile, the handy pump is started working. So on January 3rd, the pumps had the water level sufficiently under control for us to take 2 hours rest in rotation. So now that water level is under control, so they can now take rest, and they did. They took 2 hours rest, but we still had a tremendous leak somewhere below the water line. But we still had a tremendous leak somewhere below the water line. And on checking, I found that nearly all the boats' main rib frames were smashed down to the keel. In fact, there was nothing holding up a whole section of the starboard hull except a few covered partitions. So they had a trouble because there was a hole, and through this hole water was coming inside. We had survived for 15 hours since the wave hit. Since the wave hit, they survived for 15 years. But wave walker wouldn't hold together long enough for us to reach Australia. But in this condition, the ship is damaged. In this condition, they cannot reach Australia. I checked our charts and calculated that there were two small islands a few hundred kilometers to the east. So what did our narrator do? Our narrator checked probably the geographical maps, and he calculated that if there are any islands nearby, and he calculated and he checked, and he assumed that there may be two islands a few hundred kilometers to the east. One of them, Isle Amsterdam, one of them is called Isle Amsterdam, that was occupied by French scientific base. It was a French scientific base. Our only hope was to reach these pinpricks in the vast ocean. But unless the wind and seas abated so we could hoist sail, our chances would be slim indeed. The great wave had put our auxiliary engine out of action. So, what is telling? Their only hope was search and that island, but only if the wind and the sea do not cause further damage, else their chances were slim. The wave had destroyed the ship's auxiliary engine. So, how can they reach the two islands? And one of them is called Isle Amsterdam. Probably they want to go there, but how can it possible? Because that the engine of the ship is damaged. So, if the wind support them, if seas support them, then with the sail they can reach there. On January 4th, after 36 hours of continuous pumping, we reached the last few centimeters of water. Now, so it was January 3rd and now January 4th. Okay. After 36 hours of continuous pumping, we reached the last few centimeters of water. Now we had only to keep pace with the water still coming in. We could not set any sail on the main mast. Pressure on the rigging would simply pull the damaged section of the hull apart. So we hoisted the storm jeep and headed for where I thought the two islands were. Mary found some corned beef and cracker biscuits, and we ate our first meal in almost 2 days. In almost 2 days. But our respite was short-lived. At 4 p.m., black clouds began building up behind us. Within the hour, the wind was back. Within the hour, the wind was back to 40 knots and the seas were getting higher. The weather continued to deteriorate throughout the night, and by dawn on January 5th, our situation was again desperate. So what is happening here? After 36 hours of continuous pumping, on January 4th, the water was only a few centimeters left. Only a few centimeters left to be pumped out. But they still had to pump out the water which was coming in. They could not set sail on the mainmast. They hoisted the storm jeep and sailed towards the two small islands. They had their first meal in 2 days. some corned beef and cracker biscuits found by Mary. The rest period was short-lived as black clouds built up around 4 p.m. The wind was now 40 knots and the sea was getting higher. The weather got worse, and by the early morning of January 5th, the situation was bad. Okay. So what is happening here? On January 4th, 36 hours of continuous pumping. So on January 4th, so how much time, total time did the pump work? 36. After 36 hours of continuous pumping, we reached the last few centimeters of water. It does mean that 36 hours worked. It is still working. We reached the last few centimeters of water. Now we had to keep pace with the water still coming in. We could not set any sail on the mainmast. Pressure on the rigging would simply pull the damaged section of the hull apart. So we hoisted the storm jib and headed. So pressure on the rigging would simply pull the damaged section of the hull plate. We hoisted the storm jibs and headed for where I thought the two islands were. So they hoisted their sail towards, so that they can go. Their ship can be driven towards the two islands. Mary found some corned beef, Mary cracker biscuits, and we ate our first meal in last 2 days. Look at this sentence. We our first meal in almost 2 days. So they had took nothing for these 2 days. They were empty stomached, and Mary found this time some corned beef and cracker biscuits. So they ate first meal in almost 2 days. But our respite was short-lived. At 4 p.m., but our respite was short-lived, means they had a comfort, but this comfort was not long. It was short. Why? Because at 4 p.m., black clouds began building behind us. Black clouds began building behind us. Within the hour, the wind was back to 40 knots and the seas were getting higher. So, 40 knots that speed and the seas getting higher. That means wave is influencing, inflating. Okay. The weather continued to deteriorate throughout the night, and the weather again is continued to deteriorate. It is worsening. And by dawn on January 5th, our situation was again desperate. By January, their situation was again very bad. When I went in to comfort the children, John asked, "Daddy, are we going to die?" John means Jonathan, his 6-year-old child, his 6-year-old son. "Daddy, are we going to die?" I tried to assure him that we could make it. But Daddy, he went on, "we aren't afraid of dying if we can all be together. You, Mummy, Sue, and I." So, I could find no words with which to respond, but I left the children's cabin determined to fight the sea with everything I had to protect the weakened starboard side. I decided to heave it to with the undamaged board hull facing and the oncoming waves, using an improvised sea anchor of heavy nylon rope and two 22-liter plastic barrels of paraffin. That evening, Mary and I sat together holding hands as the motion of the ship brought more and more water in through the broken planks. We both felt the end was very near. When the narrator went to comfort his children, his son asked him whether they were going to die. He tried to assure him that they would make it. His son replied that they were not afraid to die till they all were together. This filled the narrator with a determination to fight back. He made efforts to protect the weakened starboard side. He used an improvised sea anchor made of heavy nylon rope and two 22-liter plastic barrels of kerosene. That same evening, the narrator and his wife sat holding hands, and they believed that their end was near. So what is happening? When I went to comfort the children, that our narrator is going to comfort his children, John asked his son, 6-year-old son, asked, "Daddy, are we going to die?" This is a very important question. Are we going to die? His son John asked. And our narrator tried to assure him that we could make it, that we can overcome this situation. Okay. But Daddy, he went on, but this child is very much philosophic at his wandering age. We aren't afraid of dying if we can all be together. You, Mami, Shu and I. He is asserting, he is saying that they don't fear dying. Why? Because they all are together. So if they die, they will all together die. So it's not to lose one another. So this is a very philosophical line. We aren't afraid of dying if we can all be together. You, Mummy, and Shu and I could find no words with which to respond, and our narrator was very much shocked after hearing this line. But I felt the children's cabin determined to fight the sea with everything I had. But our narrator was very much determined that somehow he have to save his family. To protect the weakened starboard side, I decided to heave to with the undamaged part for full facing the oncoming waves. Using an improvised sea anchor, he uses an anchor of heavy nylon rope, that is made of heavy nylon rope, and 22-liter plastic barrels of paraffin. Paraffin means kerosene. He used 22 liters plastic barrels. That evening, Mary and I sat together holding hands. So our narrator sat by her wife, and they both hold each other's hands. As the motion of the ship brought more and more water in through the broken planks, we both felt the end was very near. So they were afraid that our narrator and his wife, they were afraid that they can die. But Wave Walker rode out the storm, and by morning of January 6th, with the wind easing, I tried to get a reading on the sextant. Back in the chart room, I worked on wind speeds, changes of course, drift, current in an effort to calculate our position. The best I could determine was that we were somewhere 150,000 kilometers of ocean looking for a 65 kilometers wide island. While I was thinking, Shu, moving painfully, joined me. The left side of her head was now very swollen, and her blackened eyes narrowed to slits. She gave me a card she had made. On the forefront she had drawn caricatures of Mary and me with the words, "Here are some funny people. Did they make you laugh?" I laughed a lot as well. Inside was a message, "Oh, how I love you both." So this card is to say thank you and let's hope for the best. Somehow we had to make it. The ship made it through the storm, and by the morning of January 6th, the narrator, the ship made it through the ship made it through the storm, and by the morning of January 6th, the narrator tried to reading on the sextant. He worked with wind speeds, drift, and current and calculated their position. They were in 150,000 kilometers area of ocean. Looking for a 65-kilometer wide island. While the narrator was still thinking, his daughter should join him, and she was in pain. The left side of her head was swollen, and her blackened eyes had narrowed down to slits. She gave him a card which she had made herself. On the front of the card was a cartoon image of her parents, with words written about them being funny people and how they made her laugh. On the inside of the card, she told how she loved them both and she thanked them. This made the narrator realize that they had to make it on the island. Next, I checked and rechecked my calculations. We had lost our main compass, and I was using a spare which had not been corrected for magnetic variation. I made an allowance for this and another estimate of the influence of the westerly currents which flow through this part of the Indian Ocean. About 2 p.m. I went on deck and asked Larry to steer a course of 185 degrees. If we were lucky, I told him with a conviction I did not feel, he could expect to see the islands at about 5 p.m. Then with a heavy heart I went below, climbed on my bunk and amazingly dozed off. When I woke, it was 6 p.m. and growing dark. I knew we must have missed the island, and with the sail we had left, we couldn't hope to beat back into the westerly winds. At that moment, a tousled head appeared on my bunk. "Can I have a hug?" Jonathan asked. She was right behind him. So, the narrator reached his calculations. They lost their main compass and were using the spare on which was not corrected for magnetic variations. He estimated the influence of the westerly currents which flow through the Indian Ocean. Around 2 p.m. he went on deck and asked Larry to steer the wheel to 185 degrees. He felt if they were lucky, they would see the island by 5 p.m. Then he went below and slept. He woke up at around 6 p.m. and it was dark outside. He thought that they might have missed the island. He started worrying about how they could tackle the westerly wind more, as the ship wasn't capable to sail more. His son came and asked him for a hug. His daughter followed. So what is happening here? I checked and rechecked my calculation. Our narrator calculated his calculation. We had lost our main compass. They had lost their compass, which was a very significant and important tool to find out the direction. I was using a spare which had not been corrected for magnetic variation. Instead, he was using a spare which was not proper, which was not correct. I made an allowance for this and another estimate of the influence of the westerly I made an allowance for this and another estimate of the influence of westerly currents which flow through this part of the Indian Ocean. About 2 p.m., so around 2 o'clock, I went take on asked Larry to steer a course of 185 degrees. He ordered Larry to steer a course of 185 degrees. If we are lucky, by somehow, if the fate is good, I told him with a conviction I did not feel he could accept to see the island at about 5 p.m. So the narrator is doubting that probably they have missed that island. Then with a heavy heart I went below, climbed on my bunk and amazingly dozed off. When I woke it was 6 p.m. So our narrator was very tired and he went to sleep, and when he woke it was 6 p.m. and growing dark, and going dark means it was the night is coming. I knew we must have missed the island, and that author, our narrator, was sure that he missed that island which he wanted to take rest. With the sail we had left, we couldn't hope to beat back into the westerly winds. At that moment, a tousled head appeared by my bunk. Here, the tousled head means his son. His son Jonathan came to him and asked his dad, "Can I hug? Yeah, can I have a hug?" Sue was right behind him. That means he was followed by Sue. Why am I getting a hug now? I asked. Because you are the best daddy in the whole world and the best captain, my son replied. Not today, John, I am afraid. Why you must be, said Sue in a matter-of-fact voice. You found the island. What? I shouted. Oh my God, what is he saying? That we have found the island? What? So again, I am uttering these lines. Why am I getting a hug now? And I am again that about 2 p.m. I went on deck and asked Larry to steer a course of 185 degrees. If we are lucky, I told him with a conviction I did not feel he could expect to see the island at about 5 p.m. Then with a heavy heart I went below, climbed on my bunk and amazingly dozed off. When I woke it was 6 p.m. and growing dark. I knew we must have missed the island. With the sail we had left, and we couldn't hope to beat back into the westerly winds. At that moment a tousled head appeared on by my bunk. Can I have a hug? Jonathan asked. She was right behind him. Why am I getting a hug now? I asked. Because you were the best daddy in the whole world and the best captain, my son replied. Not today, John, I am afraid. Why, you must be, said Sue in a matter-of-fact voice. You found the island. What? I shouted. It was out there in front of us. It is out there in front of us. They chorused. As big as a battleship. I rushed on deck and gazed with relief at the stark outline of the Isle Amsterdam. It was only a bleak piece of volcanic rock with little vegetation, the most beautiful island in the world. So what is happening here? Our narrator, he asked that why was he getting a hug? His son replied that he was the best daddy in the whole world and also called him the best captain. The narrator replied that he was afraid. Sue told him then that they had found the island, which was as big as a battleship. The narrator rushed to the deck and gave a sigh of relief. They could see the complete outline of Isle Amsterdam. There was a bleak piece of volcanic rock in front of them. It had a little vegetation. It was most beautiful island in the world. Why it was the most beautiful island in the world? Because they were looking for it, and when you are looking for it and you cannot, it was very necessary. It is the core, it is the main aim for you to look for an island, and when you find that island, so that will be the best beautiful for you. So that is why this line is very interesting, very wonderful, very beautiful. This line, the most beautiful island in this world. We anchored offshore for the night, and the next morning all 28 inhabitants of the island cheered as they helped us ashore. We anchored offshore for the night, and the next morning all 28 inhabitants of the island cheered as they helped us ashore. With land under my feet again, my thoughts were full of Laddie. With land under my feet again, my thoughts were full of Laddie and Harvey. Cheerful and optimistic under the direst stress, and of Mary, who stayed at the wheel for all those crucial hours. Most of all, I thought of a 7-year-old girl who did not want us to worry about a head injury, which subsequently took 6 minor operations to remove a recurring blood clot between skin and skull, and of a 6-year-old boy who was not afraid to die. So, what is happening here? They moored the ship at some distance from the shore, and the next morning, 28 inhabitants of the Amsterdam island helped them to move on the shore of the land. As he felt the land again on his feet, he thought of his crewmen and his wife. He also thought of his 7-year-old daughter, who was injured badly. She had to go through 6 minor operations to remove the blood clot in her head. His son, who never gave up and was not afraid to die. We anchored offshore for the night. So they anchored offshore. Offshore means that nearby the shore for the night, and the next morning, so they offshored for the night. That means offshored for the night. That means they moved the ship at some distance from the shore. Okay, so they were near the shore, and they anchored that ship, and the next morning all 28 inhabitants of the island, so that was an island and it had 28 inhabitants, that 28 inhabitants, all of them helped us ashore with land under my feet. Now the narrator, after so much struggle, he got land under his feet, when he was worried that he can die with all his family. At this moment he got land under his feet. So this is the happiest moment in his life probably. And this time he was recalling, he was remembering about he was thinking about his wife and his 2 crew members, Laddie and Harvey, and also his son and daughter. Laddie cheerful, optimistic under the stress, and of Mary, who stayed at the wheel for all those crucial hours. So how all of them helped. His wife Mary, who stayed at the wheel for crucial hours, and 7-year-old daughter, who did not want to worry about the head injury, which subsequently took 6 minor operations to remove a recurring blood clot, and his 6-year-old boy, who was not afraid to die. So this is a very interesting story. We are not afraid to die.